As you prepare for your fantasy basketball draft, it's super important to identify the value of each player so you can maximize your opportunities and get that value needed to bring home your league title. We believe every NBA fan that plays fantasy football should also play fantasy basketball. We have a special guest. He's been in the fantasy basketball industry for 6 years. He's worked with Fantrax, Sports Ethos, RotoWire, and Fantasy Basketball International. He is also the host of the Balls Deep podcast. I'd like to welcome to the show again, my man, Adam King, all the way from Australia. What's going on, Adam?
Good to be here, man. As I said last time, it's nice to be doing a podcast in the evening for me. Not usually the case, but happy to be here. And let's talk about some players and some value.
Yep, and I always say that it's really dope for me to connect with people who are living in the future, actually. And Australia, anytime I talk to folks, they're like, you're ahead, we're ahead. So that's
we
dope.
are, but the world is very much the same.
Love it, love it, love it. So you know how we do. We're going to jump right into some value early. People talk about overvalued and undervalued all the time. But for the audience who's like new to fantasy, like what is the definition in fantasy basketball specifically for overvalued and undervalued players?
Yeah, look, you're really looking at players and having a look at where, I guess, their perceived value against their ADP. Usually their ADP, because that is where people are going to be drafting from. Could be their player ranks, but basically you want to run your eye down a set of player ranks and have a look at who you think is going too high or who you think is going too low. And then, of course, that is dependent on your strategy. Are you punting? Are you not punting? That impacts it as well. So it is very subjective. If you talk to, you could have 5 analysts on this show and we'd all give different players that we think are overvalued or undervalued. We all have our guys that we're higher on. So it is subjective, but for me, it's really looking at that value and just taking someone ahead of where you think they should be going.
And what kind of tools or resources can people use to identify overvalued and undervalued players? How do they get that number? Where can they get that information from?
Look, there's an abundance of information out there nowadays. There's player ranks all over the place. Every site you go to has their own rankings. And I think starting with player ranks, whether it's Basketball Monster, hashtag, RotoWire has their own player ranks. We have our own on FBI. I wouldn't rely solely on those player ranks, but it's really good to use them as a baseline. So anyone who's writing professionally, like we are, is going to have a pretty good knowledge of fantasy basketball. We're going to have an understanding. So you could have a look at those ranks and go, okay, these are going to be fairly accurate. So that's where I start with. Even for me, I go and look at player ranks of other analysts, have a look at my own. And from there, it's obviously the more you play or the more you have played in the past, the more research you've done. Like for a lot of us, we've been doing mock drafts for over a month now, whereas we're probably going to get a lot of people that are just starting to dip their toe in now into mock drafts and getting ready. We're about a month out from the season. So this is when, I guess, draft season starts to ramp up a bit. So if you've done plenty of mock drafts, and that's why we run our draft-only leagues over at FBI, B-Dub and I did a show yesterday, and I think he said we're up to about 80 draft-only leagues. So if you've been doing those, you'll have an idea of where players are going, and it'll give you a pretty accurate reflection of what's happening across the industry. One thing I would warn against or sort of, I guess, just flag, if you are coming into fantasy now and you're starting to do mock drafts, just beware of if you're going into Yahoo or Fantrax or ESPN and doing a mock draft where you don't know anyone. It's just, hey, here's a mock draft, click enter. Just keep in the back of your mind that you don't know who's drafting. Half of these could be auto picks. People might not be taking it seriously. So it doesn't always give you an accurate reflection of where players are going to go in a draft where you're playing for money, for instance. So if you are going to do mock drafts, try and do them with some friends, jump into an analyst one, or head over to FBI and do a draft only league. They're basically a mock draft, but with a small entry fee, which I think ensures that people take it seriously.
Very nice. You talked a little bit about the rankings on different platforms from different analysts. Talk about the importance, or the reliance, I should say. Should fantasy managers actually rely on these preseason rankings and projections when evaluating player values going into their drafts? Like, how heavily should they weight these different projections and rankings?
Yeah, look, I wouldn't say rely on them 100%. So don't look at the rankings and go, well, they're my rankings, because as I've said, everyone has their own opinion. So my rankings would be different to yours. Yours would be different to, say, Josh Lloyd. Josh Lloyd would be different to, I don't know, Jonas Nader. So everyone is going to have their own rankings. So don't treat them as gospel, because none of us are ever 100% right. If you look back at our ranks from last year before, none of us predict exactly where players are going to fall. So I would, as I said earlier, I would use it as a baseline, but go with your gut a little bit. I mean, if you look at player ranks and you see, like for me, we'll talk about some players that we think are over or undervalued this season. Someone I don't have on my list, but who I think is probably a little bit undervalued, is Karl Anthony Towns. So if you look at purely player ranks on Basketball Monster, for example, which I always have them open. Karl Anthony Towns, where are we? I think his rank on Basketball Monster is 49. So if you were to look at that and go, okay, 49th, I'm going to get him late 4th, early 5th, we know that's not the case. There's no way Karl Anthony Towns is available at around pick 50. So for me, he's probably still a top 25 player this season, top 30. So don't rely purely on those ranks, because as Josh says it on his show all the time, and anyone will say it, rankings are skewed based on punting. On someone like a Jaren Jackson is way overvalued because of his blocks. That happens with a few guys. So rankings are very dependent on stats and volume and all that kind of stuff. So I would use them as a guide, but I wouldn't lean 100% on them.
Let's talk about Karl Anthony Towns a little bit. As you know, that's one of my guys. I really love some Karl Anthony Towns, but I see that he's plummeted this season specifically, you know what I mean, after his performance last year. And yes, he had his worst statistical performance last year in a lot of categories. Do you think that he will be able to bounce back and get to where he was before last year? Or do you think this is where he's going to live and this is the beginning of his decline?
So I don't think he gets back to where he was, just purely because Rudy Gobert is there. He's not playing at center, so his rebounds, his blocks aren't going to get back to where they were. Not that he's ever been a big shot blocker, but his rebounds, which have sort of, when he was a first-round player, his rebounds were up at 10, 11 a game. Last season, he was down at 8. So I think he's probably down around that 8, 8.5. In saying that, I do think he's better this season. If we look at his numbers, which again I have them here in front of me, last year, I think if you asked any semi-knowledgeable NBA fan who plays fantasy, what did you think of Karl Anthony Towns last season? Most would say he had a terrible season. It was no good. He cost me my league. But if you look at pure rank, he was a top 40 player. Even with everything that went wrong per game, he was top 40. And as I said just before, his ADP is outside the top 40. So for me, that I would look at what he did last season as his floor, top 40, with plenty of room to improve, because the more time that he and Gobert spend on the floor, they'll get used to each other. Anthony Edwards is improving. I feel like Karl Anthony Towns is going to come into this season with a lot to prove. the Wolves want to win, and they want to win now. This is their window. Anthony Edwards obviously is getting a lot of hype. There's even sort of talk that this is now Anthony Edwards' team. I don't think Karl Anthony Towns is going to sort of make a fuss about this, but I have to think that he thinks internally, hang on a sec, this is still my team, because he was their franchise player. Edwards came in after him. So I really think Towns, as I said, I think he could be a back-end second-round player. And if you can get him around pick 40, I think there's a round of value there at least.
Love that. Love that. That gives me hope. That gives me hope, because I'm looking at Karl Anthony Towns. Which statistical categories should fantasy managers pay most attention to when identifying overvalued and undervalued players?
So I think the obvious one is points, because points, a lot of your heavy point scorers or your top point scorers tend to come in the top 50. So it's pretty rare to find a player beyond pick 50 that is going to get you 20 points a game. If I scroll through, I've got the ADPs up here. Outside the top sort of 50 or 60, you've got, there's maybe like a dozen players in that next 50 that are going to get you those points. Once you get down beyond pick 80, there's really no one. So points are one category I think that people tend to chase quite early, as are assists. So if you're looking for value, I feel like you can get it from the players that don't score and don't provide assists, because people are going to be reaching up to grab them. So someone like a Karl Anthony Towns, he doesn't get a lot of points now. He doesn't really get many assists. So he's someone who you can get. Who else have we got here? I mean, if we look at my undervalued players, Kristaps Porzingis is another one. He's not going to be a big scorer this year in Boston. So people are down on him, but I still think he could have a really good season. The other one I'd look at is, as I touched on before, the low volume stats. So blocks and steals, they tend to inflate a player's value quite substantially. Jaren Jackson, perfect example. He was a borderline first-round player last year, but if you punt his blocks, he dropped to about outside. I think he was outside the top 60. So makes a massive difference. People are chasing blocks a little bit this season. So guys like Nick Claxton, Mark Williams, Daniel Gafford, people are tending to start to reach for them to get blocks. So that's probably the categories I'd sort of try to avoid if you're looking to find value. Look for those guys that aren't necessarily going to be high scorers or elite in one of those low volume categories.
Very, very dope. Adam, I want to talk about today's sponsor real quick. Today's sponsor is BetOnline, and this episode is presented to you by that team. Football is back, and BetOnline is your number one information source for all your sports wagering info, with all the up-to-date and up-to-minute stats, news, scores, and matchup breakdowns. Get the latest game odds, spreads, and totals from the NFL and college football at your fingertips with BetOnline's real-time updates on statistics, news, and odds. From week 1 all the way to the college football playoff and Super Bowl, BetOnline gives you access to the best football promotions and contests available anywhere online. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to get in on the action. Remember to use the promo code BELIEVE to receive your 50% welcome bonus on your deposit. BetOnline, where the game starts. So let's keep on talking overvalued and undervalued players. Adam, are there any strategies, hacks for the draft approach for these fantasy managers who are trying to get some of this value? And how can they use that to kind of capitalize on this information when going into their drafts?
For anyone who's in a league with me, that's pretty easy. Just listen to my show, because I'll talk about the players that I'm high on and the players I'm low on, so you know exactly who I'm going after. But if you're in a league with your friends, do a bit of research. Find out who they're listening to. Are they watching shows? Whose rankings are they looking at? Because, as I said, while you don't want to rely 100% on a set of player ranks, if you know that 8 guys in your league sort of follow Basketball Monster, that's their Bible, that's where they get all of their content, all of their ranks, then you can go and have a look yourself and go, okay, I think these guys are going to be higher on James Harden than me, or they're going to be lower on this guy. So just jot down a few players that you think they might be reaching for or they might let slide. Listen to what the analysts are saying on their shows. And, I mean, for me, I guess it depends on what fantasy is for you. Like, for me, it's obviously nice to win, but I really like to have fun. And so I target guys that I just want on my team. And I feel like that, while it might impact value slightly, the more joy or the more fun I can have in a draft, I always feel good about my team. I look at my team, I go, yeah, I've got these guys. And then through the season, I don't know, I just enjoy it. And I don't tend to analyze as much because I've just got players I like watching. So it does tend to reduce how analytical I am of certain players. So make sure you're having fun, make sure you're enjoying it. But yeah, if you can understand your league, understand your rules, settings, you might have, I mean, I've got guys in my league that I don't think they do any study until the night before our draft. I'm pretty sure, because they come in with their bit of paper, a scrap bit of paper and some names written down. And whereas I mean, obviously we're the outliers here. We do this 365 days a year. But if you've got guys in your league that have no idea, cash in on that. And take advantage of the fact that they don't know who's going higher this year. They're really just going to look at what happened last year, and I'll base my rankings off that.
I wanted to share something that I thought of when you talked about how happy you are after you draft your team and you're just looking at your team. And I know you're a parent like me, you're a dad. So for me, I always compare it to and my wife would kill me, right? But like bringing home my baby like from the hospital. So after I draft my team, I'm like holding it and I'm like, oh man, I got you in the first round. I would literally like sit there the night after the draft and just like kind of look at my phone. Do you find yourself doing that where you're like, oh, this is maybe, I don't know if you go that far, but I have that same feeling of like a proud dad. I'm like, man, I did good.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Look, I don't know about the stroking of the head, but
no, it's the phone. It's the phone, Adam. I got the phone, and I'm just
stroke the phone. Yes, I do. Yeah. Look, and I mean, I'm in so many leagues, and I do so many. Look, I did drafts a month ago, and I'll go back now and look and go, oh, this team looks like a lot of fun. I've got Cade Cunningham in basically every team that I've drafted so far, and a lot of people are only in 2 leagues or something. So, but for me, I forget who I drafted. So when I actually go and look at my team, I get really excited again and look at, oh yeah, I got this guy in the 3rd round. I think he's going to be a lot of fun. So no, I do enjoy looking at my team come opening night, and I'll stroke my phone just for you.
This year, I want all of the analysts. Oh, that's funny. Good
we
stuff.
Can do that.
So you know what people came here for, Adam. You talked a little bit about Porzingis and a couple other players, but let's get everyone to grab a pen and paper, pencil, whiteboard, whatever you write with. Pull out your notes app. Adam, can you share a few players that are overvalued this season?
I can. And again, this is subjective. So this is me. You might be different. Next analyst might be different. So for me, so I've gone with 5. I picked 5. That's what you instructed me to do. First guy I've got is Desmond Bane. And this is not to say I'm down on Desmond Bane or I'm down on any of these guys. For me, I just think Bane is probably going at value now. I don't think he's going at 20. So his Yahoo ADP, that's what I've looked at. His Yahoo ADP is 22, which I think he can probably be a 2nd-round player this season. But I don't see him getting inside the top 20. Like, I just think a lot of these guys here are not, I don't know if overvalued is the right term. I just don't think there is any value in where you have to draft them at the moment. in saying that, early in the draft, it is harder to find value. So because you get later into the draft, you can get a guy at pick 90 who could be top 50. So there's 40 spots of value. You're not going to get a guy, well, it's unlikely that you're going to get a guy at pick 20 who's going to be a top 5 player. It doesn't happen, other than the outliers like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander last year. There will be the exception to the rule. But for me, Desmond Bain, he's going right on value. And so for me, that just eliminates the excitement or the fun, maybe. And maybe if I looked at my team and I went like a month into the season, I went, Desmond Bain was my second round player, I might not stroke my phone. I might have to put my phone down. So that's for me. He's just, he's going at value. Next guy is pretty much the same, Anthony Edwards. I'm not down on him, but his ADP is 13. I think a lot would need to go right for him to break into the first round this year. I think he's probably top 15, top 18. So I just don't think there's a lot of value there for him. Then we get a little bit further down. So Derek White is the guy I've gone with next. His ADP 70 odd. Where are we? Derek White, ADP of 71. So obviously people are pretty high on him coming into this season. He's the starting point guard in Boston. But I think we forget that he was basically a starter last year as well. So people sort of tend to remember that he was a sixth man. He was coming off the bench, but he didn't do that for very long. He actually started quite a lot of games last year, 70 games of his 82. So he was a starter. He played almost 30 minutes a night, or it's close to 29. So I just don't know. And he was the 89th ranked player. So I just don't know where the room is for him to improve, especially with Porzingis coming in. They've obviously lost Marcus Smart, replaced him with Porzingis. Different skill sets. But I think you ask anyone, they're going to say Porzingis is going to score more than Marcus Smart. So I don't think there's a lot of offensive upside. Maybe he gets an extra assist, but I think the ball's going to be in Tatum's hand. So for me, he's just a guy that's been hyped a little bit too much. Again, I'm not down on him. I just wouldn't take him at 70. I'd prefer to get him at sort of 80, 85. And then two more. Jonas Valanciunas I've got as my next player. His ADP is, I'm sure it was 100-ish. Where is he? Yes, there we go. 97 is his ADP. He finished last year outside the top 100. He was, where's his season? He was 121st last season. And I feel like his rank probably increased down the stretch because he was getting more minutes. But we saw for significant periods last season when Zion was healthy, Larry Nance was healthy, Valanciunas was almost sort of playing an 18-minute a night role. Because they wanted to go. They simply couldn't have Zion and Valanciunas on the court together. So if Zion is healthy, fingers crossed that he is healthy, then I just think Valanciunas, he might only play 18, 20 minutes a night. So I think he's a draftable player, but I wouldn't be taking him inside the top 100. And then the last guy is Bobby Portis, another guy who was solid enough last season, but he really needs Brook Lopez to get injured or to miss time to be a top 100, top 80 player. He's not even someone I'd really consider drafting, maybe with my last pick. But he was 119th last season in 26 minutes. I just don't see where the improvements are coming for him this season. So I just don't think there's much upside. So for him, at that range, 100, 110, I'd much rather take someone with a bit of upside and scope to slide into a bigger role at some point.
Very good, very good. And then on the other side of that coin, can you share a few undervalued players that folks should watch out for in drafts this year?
Yeah, so these are a little bit more my guys, like just guys, as I talked about, fun guys that I want to get on my team. First one is Cade Cunningham. As I said, I've got him on pretty much all my teams where possible. His ADP, which I think is actually going to come up. His ADP at the moment is 42, But I feel like with the hype and as we really start to ramp up now, I think his ADP will end up being closer to 30, which I think is about right. So at the moment, I think there's a round of value, but if you give it 2 weeks, I think that value will be gone. So for me, yeah, I'm happy to take him in the third round. I wouldn't want to reach into the second round, I don't think. And if you can get him in the fourth round, I'd absolutely be all over that. Kristaps Porzingis, touched on him earlier as well. People are pretty down on him after last season, which was arguably his best season since being drafted. He was the 14th ranked player. He was relatively healthy, played 65 games. Coming to Boston, I think people are just like, well, he's not going to touch the ball. He's going to be the third option on offense. I'm not so sure. I think he probably is the third option in the starting lineup, but I feel like they're going to alternate players and make it so that he is the first or second option at times because he's a different option. He's not a off the dribble scorer like Jaylen Brown, like Jason Tatum. So he brings a new element to their offensive game, and I think they want to utilize that. I think that with Rob Williams and Al Horford, they're going to stagger their minutes. So he probably doesn't play 35 minutes. He might play 31. He might play 32, but I still think he does enough to be like a back-end second round, so top 25 player. And his ADP at the moment is, where are you, Porzingis? 43. So if you can get him outside the top 40, I think there's a round to 2 rounds of value. Then we drop down a little bit. Jakob Poeltl, he could be on this list every year, I feel like. He's always undervalued. If you look at last season, again, much like Karl Anthony Towns, I think if you asked the common fan what kind of a year did Jakob Poeltl have, they'd say he was pretty bad, which, to be fair, he probably was for the first 2/3 of the season until he was traded. He wasn't good, but he ended the season as a 68th ranked player. Despite struggling in San Antonio, he picked things up. And now if you look at his, much quicker if I actually type them in, his ADP is 84. So I think if you looked at last season, as I said, he was 68th. I'd consider that his floor. He's still only 27. I think people think he's a lot older. So, yeah, for me, another guy, if you can get him outside the top 80, he could potentially be top 60. And then 2 guards, Markelle Fultz, another one of my guys this season. I'm really high on him. His ADP is, I know it's down in the 90s, I think, 95. I think he could easily be top 60 this season. I'm much higher on him than most, so that one's probably a little bit just me being biased. As is this last player, Ben Simmons. His ADP is 130 odd, I think. People are down on him, and rightfully so. He's burned a lot of players over the last 2 years. So I can understand that you would just want to avoid him. But for me, the upside it's there. He was 137th last season on a per-game basis, and he was terrible. So I think if you can get him at 130, 120, at that point in the draft, you're taking a flyer anyway. So if he starts, plays 30 minutes, we know what he can do. He can be a 12.8 rebound, 8 assists, 1.5 steals, close to a block, 65% from the field. That's top 60 without breaking a sweat. So he's just, again, another one that I'm just high on, and I have a bit of a soft spot for him. So I hope he proves me right. But if he doesn't, you just drop him and grab someone off waivers.
Yeah, I think Ben Simmons is the poster boy for undervalued. I think that, because the recency bias is such a big thing with fantasy sports, right? It's like, what have you done for me lately? And a few years ago, though, this guy was like a fantasy baller. Like he was like one of the top guys, you know what I'm saying? And so for me, I'm with you. If I could grab him at the end of my drafts, you know what I'm saying, I'll even reach up a round or two to make sure that I secure him because the upside is so clear. Listen, Adam, it is always an honor to have you. I want to take a minute to talk about anything you have happening. I know there's some stuff happening with the podcast network. Why don't you just share with the folks and then also how they can get in contact with you?
So Twitter is easiest, at Adam King 91 on Twitter. In terms of what we've got coming up, I'm actually about to head away for a few weeks. So my show will go on a bit of a hiatus for probably 3 weeks, at least with me hosting. B-Dub he's going to try and host a couple of shows, but he's got young kids. He's got a busy home life. So if he can squeeze it in, there might be a couple of episodes. But we have just brought on Noah Rubin. So he's joined FBI with his Tank Me Later podcast. So he will be continuing to roll that out every week over on our YouTube channel. He should have, I think he's doing his first show for us tomorrow with B-Dub, and he'll have a new intro and new graphics. So I'll be keen to watch that one. Matt Lawson is relaunching his Dynasty show. So he did a couple episodes 2 months ago, I think, but then life happened and he's got, again, a young family and his full-time job. So I'm pretty sure he's relaunching that next week with Noah. I think that's the idea, that they'll be doing the show together for the first one. So we'll have other shows coming out, despite mine having a little bit of a break. We've got Karan Talwar, who's helping us with his written content. So we've got stuff going up, and we've got other things in the pipeline as well. So we're trying to expand and make ourselves a little bit bigger. So yeah, good things coming. Fantasy Basketball World Cup is about 3/4 full now. So we'll be filling that up in the next week. Follow us on socials. Listen to the podcast. Matt will probably have some entries on his show. So there is still an opportunity to get into the World Cup. And I think the drafts start in about 2 weeks for that. So we'll be filling that up in the next week, letting everyone know. And then the drafts will kick off early October, I think.
Very, very dope. Adam, would you sit tight for me? I'm just going to close out the show. I'll be right back.
Yep.
Thank you, sir. Oh, man, always a pleasure to have Kingy on. Listen, folks, I want to make sure you guys know about this contest that we're doing for these basketball cards. We have 2 rookie cards here. We have a Cade Cunningham rookie card, and we have a Josh Giddey rookie card that we're giving away. To enter, all you have to do is visit Apple Podcasts and leave us a review about the show. If you do that, make sure you shoot me an email at believeinfantasy@gmail.com just to verify your entry, and we'll put you in the pool to see if you could win one of these amazing rookie cards. All you have to do is leave a review on Apple Podcasts. Again, if you need help with your team, your draft, just drop your questions in the comment section below. I promise I will respond to every single comment. Also, if you want to join our free Discord community, all you have to do is visit www.believeinfantasy.com. And now that you know how to identify overvalued and undervalued players, play the waivers, set your lineups, and check out the next episode, you freaking fantasy nerd. This episode was presented to you by BetOnline, where the game starts.